Again, welcome everyone. Today's webinar is brought to you by NC State University Industry Extension Services, and I'm pleased to turn it over to today's speaker, Brian Vina. Brian?
Hey, thank you, Susan. All right, everybody, let's get started. This is again our second session in this three-part series. So if for some reason you missed the first one, head to our website, get in touch, and get a copy of that first PowerPoint presentation. And then we'll have one more after this one today. We'll also be sharing this presentation after today's session. So you should have all three by the end if you're interested. Okay, so who am I? My name is Brian Vina. I am an educator and cybersecurity specialist with NC State Industry Extension Services. I've worked as a contractor with the federal government. I've worked with small businesses in an IT role. And I work here at NC State now as an educator and cybersecurity awareness specialist. I've got some certifications there that are relevant to today's presentation. And I work with several different professional groups to talk about cybersecurity, to attend meetings, to talk about industry regulations, and what I'm hearing from you, the small business owners who actually have to deal with these regulations. So I do actively get a chance to hear what's coming down the pipeline, how we might be supporting manufacturers, hopefully grants and federal incentives to get this work done. And what are we going to talk about today? I'm here to talk to you today about getting started with CMMC. So last time we really just introduced the topic. We talked about what it is, where it came from, who were the key players. And today we're going to talk about how to start with your business and your CMMC process. Things like scoping, understanding policies, and then creating your own policies, and then self-assessment. So that's our key goals today. Quick recap. These are some slides from our last one. So you might say, hey, I'm having deja vu. I remember these from the last time we met. Just a key recap in case there's folks who weren't here for our last meeting. So what is the CMMC standard? It is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It's the DoD or DOW's requirement for doing business in the defense industrial base. So in the most basic terms, if you work with the DoD as a prime or subcontractor somewhere in that supply chain, you are most likely required to comply. So who is that? It's about 220,000 defense contractors here in the United States. When does it start? It's a 3-year phased rollout. By the end of the 3 years, every single contract that the DoD puts out will have a CMMC clause in it. As of today, we are in phase 1, where that clause can be found in select contracts. We do not have information on how many contracts that is. To my knowledge, the federal government has not released a number, so we can only guess how many contracts it actually appears in. But what we know is that over this 3-year phased rollout, it will appear in more and more contracts. And by the third year of this phase, the third phase, it will be in all contracts. What is the goal? It's basic. It's that security contractors, they must meet minimum requirements. And at level 1, which we're going to talk exclusively about today, it is really basic. It is a small group of controls that most small businesses would probably want to have in place, regardless of whether they work with the federal government or not. So back to that timeline we talked about a little bit. So this is a graphic that the federal government came out with. That's why it's blurry. I don't know why they can't make a version that's not blurry, but this is their 3-year phased rollout plan. So we're in that phase 1 right now. That began last year, November 10th. As of November 10th of the next year, what will change? This is the big difference, is that self-assessment at level 2 will go away when we get into phase 2. So as of November 10th of this year, 2026, the companies who are considered level 2 will not be able to self-assess. It'll be more expensive, it'll be more rigorous, and they'll have to work with third parties, those groups that are called C3PAOs, Certified Third Party Audit Organizations. And then you can see this is the really important thing. By 2028, all contracts, all new contracts will have CMMC as a requirement for a condition of contract award. And again, this is my last recap slide. What are we talking about today? We are focused on level 1, which is known as foundational. It is meant to be self-assessed. The focus is basic cyber hygiene, and that breaks down into 17 basic safeguarding requirements. Now, it can be a little bit tricky, a little bit confusing because those 17 actually break down into a larger number. There's about 59 of those. Those requirements, and we'll talk about them today, must be met, and that means all of them. It's not a partial implementation or we've got 80% of it and we have a real plan to get the last 20% done. No, in this situation, you need to have all of those 17 basic safeguarding requirements met before you can submit your self-assessment to SPURS. If you're level 2, that number ramps up. It's a higher number, and instead of talking about FCI, Federal Contract Information, we're talking about CUI. You'll hear me use those terms interchangeably today because that's kind of the nomenclature of the business. Most people just say CUI when they discuss this topic, but technically, if we're talking about level one companies, we are talking about FCI. But the way that we protect them, the systems we stand up, the way that we assess them is very, very similar. So don't be shocked or surprised if you hear me say FCI or CUI. If I say FCI, I'm mostly talking about level one, but CUI companies, companies that are at level two, they also have FCI. They just have CUI in addition. So they have to meet those more strict requirements. Okay. And we won't talk about level three again. That's expert. You will work with something called the DIBCAC, which is a government-led assessment team. It's a much more rigorous, much more formal process. It's led by the government. You don't have a choice on that. And it's going to be a very select number of companies that have to deal with level three. So we're in phase one. What's important about phase one? It's that level one and level two companies, so CMMC level one and level two companies, can both self-assess during this period. Is it in all contracts? No. As we just talked about, it can be in any new contract, but we don't have numbers of how many contracts it appears in today. We should protect ourselves by becoming compliant before it appears in our contracts. Why? Because we've actually, while working with the DoD as a subcontractor or a contractor, we've actually been self-attesting anyway that we have these minimum security requirements in place. These go back almost 10 years. They're part of the FAR and the DFARs. Those clauses have been in your contracts. And if you look really carefully on a contract that you have today with the federal government, you will find the FAR clause somewhere buried in there. So you've actually already been saying that you're compliant with this in order to do business with the federal government. Now it's going to come with more teeth. There's going to be more chance for them to exclude companies who don't comply and fine companies who lie about their level of compliance. Do you have to have a C3PAO? Again, no. As of today, all companies do not have to have one. As of next year or late this year, companies who are level two will have to have a C3PAO. We'll talk about why that might be a challenge, both from a cost perspective and also just availability of those resources. And then final, what should you be thinking about in phase one? Action is required. If you have not taken an action, you should start immediately. This will take time. This is not a 1 week process. It's certainly not a 1 day process. So you must get the ball rolling. Whatever that is, whatever you do, start today, right? Start this week, start as soon as possible. If you haven't started, you haven't lost your business yet, you haven't lost your contracts yet, but you're risking that every day that goes on. And because this is a multi-month process for most companies, I would highly advise you to start today. You're here in this webinar, so that is a start, right? Okay, so if you did start today and you came to me and said, hey, Brian, we're a small defense contractor. We make some metal, fabricated metal. We finish pieces of metal and we ship them on to another company. They put them on a drone. They put them on an autonomous vehicle. They put them on an armored tank. We don't do that. We're just 12 or 13 people. What should we do? We have none of this stuff and we're going to lose our business if we don't do it. Okay, here's the list that I would have in front of them. I would say, okay, we have a roadmap. First thing we need to do, we've got to identify who's a part of this process. I mean, from owner operator of the small business down to secretary at the front door who's going to be keeping a log of all guests who enter the space and everyone in between. On my next slide, I'm going to drill down a little bit deeper of who should be involved there. But it really is key that before you start, you pick the people that are going to be involved, you alert them to this process, and most likely you're going to set a weekly or a bi-weekly meeting cadence. You really should stand up a team and you should start meeting regularly with that team. You should have shared documentation. You should have a process on how people communicate within that group, whether that's a Slack group or like a Google meeting space. Lots of ways you can organize those folks, set up a weekly meeting or a bi-weekly meeting and start making changes, right? Start action. Number two, scoping the environment. So when we talk about scoping, we mean determining which systems, people, and processes handle FCI, Federal Contract Information, or CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information. We need to know exactly who accesses today, and this is a key distinction that I hear businesses say a lot. It's not just who does access, what devices do access, it's who can access. So I was just on a call yesterday with a small business, working through this process, working with a third-party assessor, and they said, well, no one actually goes into that SharePoint. Just the engineering team uses that SharePoint. They said, well, who can access? And the answer was, well, everyone can. You know, I can as an IT person, the administrative staff can, the owner operator can for visibility. Everyone can. Well, that means that they're included in the scope. So when you think about scoping, it's not just who does touch, where does that data live? It's where can touch, where can the data be accessed from. So if there's a workstation, a computer in your office that everyone is able to access, there's no username and password, and anyone can sit down at that computer, and that workstation has access to a file server or to a cloud drive or to a place that FCI or CUI lives, that device is in scope, and now all users are in scope because they can all access it. So think carefully about your scope. We'll have more slides in this presentation about scoping. Next up, number three, your initial self-assessment. You might say, like, already I'm going to do a self-assessment. We just got started. I don't even know what I'm assessing. This is a lot like if you went to the doctor and you said, I'm having all sorts of symptoms. My stomach hurts and I've got a headache and it's been going on for 2 weeks. The doctor is going to do a self-assessment right there. They're going to start asking questions in an ordered series. They're going to take notes as you go, and they're doing a self-assessment. Even though they don't know exactly what your problems, your strengths, your weaknesses, the issue is, they're just going to ask the ordered questions. They're going to record what they find, and it's going to help them find out, here's the baseline. Here's what you do today, and here are the glaring holes in that baseline. So, for example, if you started your self-assessment and you got to one of the first questions in access control and you said, okay, do users have unique usernames and passwords? You go, well, no, we don't really need that because there's only 6 people in the office and we're all able to access all the different computers. So nobody has to have a password or username. Okay, write that down. You do not comply currently with the requirements of CMMC level 1, but it's okay. Just write it down, take notes on it, and start writing if you do have any controls in place that might help you satisfy that need. Like, for example, you say, well, we all use Microsoft. We have Windows computers. We use Microsoft. We all use PowerPoint and Office and Word. Okay, well, there are features built into those tools that can help you use passwords, usernames, set up access control, even take it a step further and have things like multi-factor authentication. So start with that initial self-assessment, start recording what you do well, what you don't do well, and where will you get those questions for the self-assessment? We're going to talk about that today. There are free resources out there. There are lots of lists of questions or self-assessment guides that you can use, so you don't have to start from scratch here. Next up, compile evidence. So as you go, you're going to record everything you find. So if, for example, you say, oh, we do have a policy that says all users must log into their own computer. They may not share that password with others. And if someone comes into our office, a brand new person, a visitor, a delivery person, someone to work on the air conditioning, yeah, we do have a locked door at the front. We have a person who sits there. There's a camera on that locked door. We have them sign in and we print a little badge. They have to wear a little badge as they walk through. When they leave, we have them sign out and we can track all that. Okay, great. Write that down, record that. And you don't have a policy yet, but you are doing the things that your policy will include. What you'll have to do now is write down the procedure that enforces that policy. So, for example, that procedure might say, all visitors must stop at front desk. All visitors must record their name and their purpose of business, the time they entered, on this log. Here is the person who is required to do that. Delivery people, contractors who come in to fix things, external IT people who come to our office. Okay, great. So compile all that evidence, write it down, tell us how you do it. And if possible, take screenshots of any policies, any procedures, anything you have in place that is going to help you meet these requirements. Next up is remediate gaps. So now you've asked some of the questions, you've written down, recorded, taken screenshots, typed up policies that you maybe had informally, you've compiled the evidence. Now you're comparing the evidence that you have with the self-assessment you went through and saying, where are our gaps? Do we have 5 out of 50 of these in place, or do we have 45 out of 50? If you're at 45, you are so ahead of the ball game. This is going to be really easy for you to get to the finish line. For example, I had a funny one. I was teaching a training session on CMMC 2 or 3 weeks ago, and a person said, we have one door that we leave open because we have a dog in the office. And we can't lock the door because then the dog can't get in. And I said to them, you have to lock that door. If that's your physical security, is that you keep your CMMC info, your FCI or CUI in this one office, and you have a locked door, that counts. You've got physical security. You don't need some fancy extra system on top of that. You're going to have to move the dog's food bowl. The treats for the dog can no longer be in the locked office where you keep the CUI, FCI data. That's it. So some folks are going to be way ahead of the curve here, and they've just got to write this stuff down. They've got to remediate small gaps. The dog can't go into that office anymore, the file server office. These are the small gaps, hopefully, you have to remediate. If you find that you have a much larger set of gaps, of course, you need to dedicate more time, more people, and you need to work harder on this process to remediate. You can repeat 3, 4, 5 over and over and over. So even though I've kind of had this as a 1 through 6 system, of course, you won't get to 6, submit your score in spurs, until you feel like you're good on the remediation step. So what you really want to do is 3, 4, 5, spin it back around, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, until you say, you know what, as I do my self assessment, I'm coming up with perfect. We're doing all of these. We have a policy in place. The policy is effective, meaning I can go and check it right now and it actually is working the way I think it's working. And I have documentation. I have some proof that this policy is in place and working. Time to submit my score, and you're good to go. We talked about involving the right people in this. So here's a more deep dive into who needs to be involved. So senior leadership needs to be involved for visibility and because they will be signing off. Their name will be the one on the final affirmation. So it's critical that they believe this information, they trust that it's true, they know that you've taken the right steps to get the right information in this final affirmation. And also, they're going to have to be bought in because there will have to be changes in most businesses for CMMC to work, right? Some of those changes will be annoying. They'll be a hassle. They will add friction to processes that may be frictionless. For example, you may say, well, the drawings come in and they go to a secretary. The secretary then prints out all the drawings and posts them for the engineers. Okay, we probably can't do that because we don't want that secretary, that administrative assistant, we don't want them to be in scope because now their desk, their computer, the software they have installed, everything they do, it's all in scope. So from now on, the engineers are going to have to access the file share and print it themselves. That's friction, right? That's additional friction. But if senior leadership is aware of this, if they understand the stakes, then they can explain why the change happened and they can require folks to buy into these changes. So we do need senior leadership on board. Same goes for if you find out you have to buy a new software or you have to pay for an upgraded licensing fee. For example, if you're storing information in the cloud, like with Microsoft, you may have to pay for a more expensive version of your current cloud offering. So you may have to migrate your data from a non-commercial cloud into a more expensive commercial cloud. We need our senior leadership to understand why we did that, to approve the cost, and to be aware that there might be some time where we're not able to access that data as we migrate from one cloud to the other. So again, senior leadership needs to be involved. The next most important person or group of people, internal IT staff. Anyone who handles IT responsibilities for your organization is going to be all over this process, whether they like it or not. The sooner they can get on board, the sooner they understand that it's going to be part of their role moving forward, because this is not a one-time deal, it's a continuous process, the better. If you have external IT providers, it's so critical that you involve them early in the process for two reasons. One, you're going to need their help. A lot of what you do is probably relying on what they do as IT providers, and you're going to need their help. But number two, this is critical. Any data, any FCI CUI data that ends up in the hands of those external IT providers puts them in scope. So here are some examples. Your external IT provider handles cloud backup for you or handles physical backups for you. They're in scope. Your external IT provider takes laptops to fix them or to upgrade components of laptops to add more RAM. Well, that laptop has a hard drive, that hard drive has FCI, they're in scope. They have remote access to your network or individual devices in your network that handle FCI or CUI. They're in scope. So what does that mean? It means they must meet the same CMMC level requirement as you to continue working with you. So if you have an external service provider, what's usually called an MSP, a managed service provider, and they do things like set up laptops, install wireless devices, and they have access to CUI or FCI, they must meet the same level of CMMC as you. Sorry, this is acronym soup. So if you're a level 1 company, your external IT provider needs to be CMMC level 1 certified. If you're a level 2 company, they need to be level 2. Okay, so keep that in mind. First question you should probably ask as you go through this journey and you do have an external IT provider. Hey, what's your familiarity with CMMC? Are you guys certified to work with CMMC? Do you have any CMMC assessors or CMMC registered practitioners on your staff? If they say no, you need to think carefully about if you can continue that relationship or if you might need to find a new provider. If a provider says, yes, we can do this, we're CMMC people, but they're not more specific, go look them up. The Cyber AB keeps a registry of all companies who are certified. So if somebody says, yeah, we're a registered practitioner, or we have 2 folks on staff who are assessors, Go look them up. Go find out if that's true or not. If they're not listed in that database, then it's not true and they can't actually do that work legally, right? They may be able to handle the actual work itself. Legally is what I mean. Next up is FCI CUI employees. What I mean by that are your employees who handle FCI and CUI the most, right? The ones who have a day-to-day operation that requires them to touch this data. And for some companies, that's one person. This is relatively normal. Somebody says, yeah, we have one person who deals with our federal side. We're 80% commercial and we're 20% federal, and we have one person dedicated to it. This person needs to be made aware of the requirements, how it might change their job, the way that they do their job, where they can access data, what devices they can work on, what software is okay to be installed on that devices, whether or not they can use personal devices to access the data. All of those are things you're going to need to discuss. And then finally, all employees. We do want to talk to all of our employees about this thing that's happening at work, this change that's going on. The why, the federal government's requiring us. We have to do it. It's part of our DoD contracting. The what, it's about sensitive data. It's about controlled data. It's about protecting that data. And the how, we're going to be putting in policies. You're going to see some training. You're going to see some meetings on the calendar. This is why we're doing it, and this is what we're doing. Okay, assessment scoping. So we've talked about who's involved in this. We've talked about why we have to do it. We know that the less we put in our scope, the easier it will be, the faster it will be, the cheaper it will be to protect. So of course, we want to reduce our scope. Now there is a risk of underscoping. If we have too small of a scope, we may miss devices and data that should be in scope. But we certainly want to lean towards the underscoping side of the spectrum versus overscoping. Too often I meet with companies and I hear them say, well, they deal with it and that computer accesses it and that printer prints out drawings and schematics, so it's probably everybody. That's really not the right approach because you now said all these rules, all these kind of restrictive policies I'm going to implement, they now affect every device, every person, every part of our network. It makes much more sense to look carefully at where the FCI and CUI is moving around, devices, people, and where the data lives when no one's accessing it or using it. Think about those things, start making a map, and record it. Remember, if your MSP stores, accesses, processes in any way your data, they're in scope. Is there a way that you can still work with an MSP if they're not certified? Yeah, you have to think carefully about where that data is and not let them touch it anymore. So if in the past they've had remote access to your network for whatever reason, you may have to take that away, or you may have to logically separate your network using something called VLANs and firewalls to say, okay, we have a network now where most of our employees live, our general production network. Sure, the MSP can still remotely access it. And then we have our little CUI FCI network, what we'll call an enclave over here. Nobody can access that except for the authorized users that are in-house. And then cloud data. Been a couple of mentions already today about cloud data. Remember, if FCI or CUI goes to the cloud, it's in scope. That means the cloud environment must meet the same requirements that you do on site. Are there ways to do that? Absolutely. Cloud providers like Microsoft and Amazon already have specific environments designed to handle CMMC. The difference is you'll have to pay a little bit more to utilize those spaces. I'm going to pause here and take a look at questions because I see there's a lot of questions popping up and I want to make sure that we're not skipping over stuff that's important and could help our conversation. Yeah. Okay. So what about single owner operated businesses? No one has access of my home computer, still have PW though, password though. Of course, you would want to have passwords on there. You want usernames and passwords, and you need the ability to audit that no one has access to it. So the best solution for that is to keep the devices that have this data and any physical media like CDs, DVDs, hard drives, flash drives, to keep them in a locked drawer. So if this is a single laptop or desktop computer, lock the door to that office. As long as it's in a dedicated room, you've actually met the security requirement there for physical access. Yes, score not required for level 1 in SPURS. Just an attestation by the affirming official that all requirements of level 1 are met or documented. If an ESP is providing service to you, there must be a shared responsibility matrix. Yep. So if somebody has your data, if somebody has some of your data, you need what's called a shared responsibility matrix. Helps you to understand who has that data, where that data lives, and what their responsibilities are to protect it. Okay. Website to check if an external provider meets the requirements for CMMC. Cyber AB. So Cyber AB, that's the authorization board or accreditation board. I'll come back and we'll talk about more of these questions at the end, but I will give you those resources at the end of the presentation. There will be a slide that lists all the resources that I mentioned today. Okay, let's keep moving. So more detail on how to minimize scope. Number one, map the data flow. Literally sit down and think about when we receive a contract from the federal government or a prime, someone else that gives us this data, this contract, where does it go? Who touches it? And what devices can, not what do, but what devices can access it? Every one of those devices, those people, those software applications that can access this data, they are all part of the data flow and they should be tracked. Create a map, create a schematic. You can do this by hand. You can use lots of fancy software to do this, like Visio, for example, and start to diagram out your network. Number two, eliminate excess. Start identifying unnecessary devices and users and eliminate them from the data flow. So as you draw out that map and you say, wait a minute, accounting has access to this? Why? Why is the whole account? There's 6 people that are in accounting or 1 person. Why would they have access to this data? Do they need it? Go ahead and do that type of accounting work and figure out who doesn't need to, what devices don't need to. And if you have multiple networks in your office, take out the networks that don't have to have access. So you have separate VLANs, separate virtual local area networks. You have a Wi-Fi network for guests. You have a separate Wi-Fi network for production. And then you have a third Wi-Fi that's for all the other staff, like human resources, administrative staff. Make sure that they can't interact with each other. Make sure there really are firewalls that prevent unnecessary interactions and data flow. Number 3, isolate systems. So that VLAN concept I talked about a few times today, virtual local area networks. These are logical separations, not physical separations. An example of a physical separation is we have a single laptop that is allowed to access these federal contracts. We use that laptop to go on SAM. We use that laptop to go on SPURS. We use that laptop to download contracts and information about the contract. We do all of our work that's federal contracting work on that one computer. That computer is on its own network. It's in its own room. The room is locked, and only one person needs to have access, so only one person has a unique username and password. That's a great example of isolating a system. And then limiting access. Remember, if people don't need access, we don't give it to them. In the past, the easiest way to set up a network was everybody can access everything because it's just the easiest way to set up networks. And in a lot of small businesses, that's how things go. There's no real reason to set up restrictive username passwords, firewalls, access control lists. That stuff just makes people's job feel harder. It adds friction. So it's really common to walk into a small business and them to say, of course, everybody can access everything. Why wouldn't they? Well, the time has changed. The best way to set up a network today is what's called the principle of least privilege. So start by giving nobody access. When somebody comes and says, hey, for my job, I need to have access to this server. Okay, go in, talk to the IT staff, talk to anybody that's part of this process and say, do they really need to have access? What's the reason? Okay, they're part of this federal contracting work. Okay, great. We're going to permit you access. You are now part of a control list. You're now part of an approved user list. Anyone who does not meet those, even if they say they do, but you go and find an audit that they don't need access, make sure that they are removed. And then finally, document. Just keep documenting as you go. Document successes, failures, changes, and always keep a good sense of your current state, because at the end, you need to submit your current state. Not how it was, not how you hope it will be, but your current state. Data flow mapping tips, just a little more advice on how to track that data. So think about everyone and everything that touches it. Software, if there's a software that can access a file server because you need to edit PDFs, okay, that software is in scope. If there's a user that accesses only once a year, but we leave their access open all year round, for auditing, like for an example might be you have an accountant on your staff or someone that handles accounting activities, but once a year they need to see how many federal projects you've completed, that person should be removed. There should be a way where you can produce a report that just gives them the number and they can't actually see the FCI or CUI data. Minimize access. Continue to think about strategically how many devices process, store, and transmit this data. And it should be the bare minimum. It shouldn't be any more than you absolutely need to get the job done. Map and document. Create that final detailed data flow map that clearly specifies where the CUI FCI lives. If you're level one, you don't have to have this map, but it's very helpful. And it's one of the first things that I see CMMC assessors ask for when we meet with small businesses. If you're level two, you have to have it, so you should just start working on it anyway. I mentioned that term enclave, and you might be seeing that term pop up a lot. You might be seeing it in advertisements. You might be hearing specialists or experts talk about it when you work with them. Here's all an enclave means: a separate, isolated, and more secure environment where you're going to keep things like FCI, CUI devices, data, and users, and you're going to keep them away from your normal business operations. So I work here at NC State. We have a really simple example of this. There is a Wi-Fi network that all of us use. It's called EduRoam. EduRoam means that I can go into any part of the campus and I can connect physically or I can connect wirelessly, and boom, they automatically know that I'm part of their approved user list because of software and because of usernames and passwords on my device. But if you were to come and visit the campus and you're not a user, you'll be asked to join a guest Wi-Fi network. Those two networks are logically divided. Now, on top of that, the university also has a secure data enclave that they keep their most sensitive data. That's separate from the regular work one, the EduRoam network that I'm on, and it's separate from the guest Wi-Fi network that you would join as a campus guest. That's an example of them having a dedicated, secure environment for data, a dedicated environment for their day-to-day users, and a dedicated environment for their guest users. Those networks, you do not have the ability to traverse from one to the other without additional authentication and authorization. So, how might this work for you? You figure out that there's 3 computers that need to be part of this environment. Okay, they're physical computers or virtual machines, does not actually matter. That is where your data is in use, so it's part of your FCI CUI enclave. You could physically move these computers to a separate place to have them behind a locked door, but also, and more importantly, they're going to be on a logically separated network, their own network, where those devices cannot just go out and touch any old device that joined the guest Wi-Fi at your office. Storage devices. If you have a file server, a physical file server, or computer that acts as a file server, that should be included in your logically separated CUI enclave. And then the network itself. How do you keep that guest network away from your network? You create VLANs, virtual local area networks. That is a very simple setting that all commercial routers have. And when I say commercial, I mean the one that your ISP gave you, the one that your internet provider gave you. It has the ability to do VLANs. You do not need any sort of hardcore networking gear to get this done. Depending on the size of your business, the type of controls that you need to have over it, remote access, auditing, things that you might want your firewall to be able to do. Of course, you'll have to pay more for that, but even the most basic router, the most basic Wi-Fi setup has the ability to create VLANs. What's the benefit of a CMMC enclave? Why is everyone trying to sell this to you? There's a bunch of answers to that. The reason they're trying to sell it to you, lots of providers out there, is because then they can charge you a monthly fee and they can upsell you on services and different things they might do. But it also does have a real tangible benefit. Anything that's in the enclave can meet the strict requirements of CMMC, and you have no guesswork. If it's in the enclave, it is subject to all of these requirements. So as you do scoping, as you think about where data lives, where it's processed, where it's stored, if it's in the enclave, you know the answer to all that. Everything outside the enclave, you don't have to include in your CMMC scope. So it does make life easier. Should you do it? 100% a personal decision. There are enclaves you can create by yourself in your own environment. There are enclaves you can pay where all of your data and processing is happening off-site. Of course, there's a cost associated with that, so you'll have to make your own decisions there on what's most valuable to you. Documentation. Remember, a lot of businesses have some policy in place, like users get usernames and passwords. I think most small businesses have this already in my experience. When I go and visit with people and I say, hey, does Jim have to log in before he starts work? They say, yeah, of course. It's a Windows machine. It's got a username and a password. Okay, how is that recorded? How is that documented? How could it be audited? Well, it's not written down, but when new people come, we hand them a laptop and we quickly explain, you're going to have a username and password, and it's got to be this long, and it's got to have a special character. Okay, great. Write a policy to match that. What you're actually doing is right, but if you don't have a policy, then we can't count it. It doesn't count for what we're doing here. So what you need to do is record that and write it down in a formal way. All users must be authenticated with a unique username and password. Passwords must not be shared. Usernames must not be shared. Boom, you've now met that requirement. So the point here is you need to go through and see what you already do. That's part of that self-assessment, and just write down everything you do. You can write it down informally. It doesn't have to be written down in policy speak. You can say new users are given unique username and password. Door is locked. A front door. Users have badge to enter physical site. These are all really basic, but they're all meeting security requirements of CMMC level 1 and level 2. So start writing stuff down and record everything you can about your current status. A lot of people say, well, we're not there yet. We've got a lot of stuff. We're buying a new router, and I've got a guy, he used to work at Google, and he's going to do this for me. And I've got another guy, he's going to do this for me. And next year, we're installing XYZ, and we're going to move to this cloud. So I don't need to write it down now. You should write down what you have. You should start to document today because this will help inform decisions. And as you change, as you grow, as you add new devices, users, and processes, you can update that documentation. Now, there is a document that is required at level 2 that's not required at level 1, but I strongly encourage you, as does the CMMC program, they strongly encourage you to keep one even at level 1. It's called a System Security Plan, or SSP. SSPs can be anything you want at level 1 because, again, you don't have to turn it in. What should it have? Well, there are templates out there. There are pre-filled documents that can help you get started, and I'll share some of those at the end, again, in our resources section. But utilize that SSP as a place to record what you're doing today, and you can even make notes in there about changes you might make in the future. So we've talked around it all day. We've talked about these security requirements known as controls. Let's actually dig in and look at them. So the most basic one out there, and the first one because it's alphabetical, it's in a family or a domain called access control, AC for short. It's at level 1, so you can see AC level 1. And then there you can see a security requirement number, a unique identifier. And then you can see its short name. Then you see its description. Here's what's called a practice statement. So for example, limit information system access to authorized users. Okay, great. Like we just talked about that one. Do people use passwords to log onto their computer? Check. When people log onto their computer, can they access everything in the network or only specific devices, specific data? Okay, if the answer is yes, they can only access specific devices, you may already have this one in place. You may be meeting AC level 1 3.1.1. That's awesome. Now, do you have it written down? Can you prove it? Do you have a screenshot or something you could show to an auditor if needed that would prove that this is currently in place? Awesome. That's great. Now all we need to do is write a policy to match what we're doing in real life. Okay? So remember, each domain access control then has a security requirement inside of it, which has a name and a number, and then it has a practice statement. There are lots of resources out there that expand on what that practice statement is. It gives you a much more detailed and thorough explanation and even includes examples. So if you're looking at this and say, man, this is pretty basic, I don't really know what it means, don't worry. The scoping guides, the self-assessment guides, and lots of third-party guides out there, free guides that you can find on the internet, have real good information and examples of what they mean by this kind of tech speak language. Let's keep looking at this access control requirement. So here's the example. Authorized access control. Limit information system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users or devices. What does that mean? Only people who should have access to your systems and data should actually have it. Shared accounts, accounts left active, and former employees who still have credentials are some of the big failures there. So if every time a new person joins, you create a new account, you provision that account for a user, but when people leave, when they change roles, when they retire, you don't delete them. You just leave them there because no harm, no foul. It's not hurting anybody. That needs to go away. Shared accounts. This is a big, big failure. This one will absolutely screw up your ability to say, yes, we're doing it all right. People can't share accounts anymore. I know if there's some computer that for 10 years you've just been able to walk up and it's so easy, it's like your scheduler. People can walk up and see what's on the production floor right now, what we're going to be working on this afternoon, what's coming up tomorrow. But that includes federal work. Got to get rid of it. Can't be a shared account, can't be a shared computer with no password anymore. So what does implementation actually look like? You could use Active Directory. right? If you have someone on your staff that knows how to deal with Active Directory, that's a great way to create user accounts, to add them to user groups, and then to add those groups to devices, to processes, to data. So you can provision them out using those organizational groups. You could create an authorized list. So this is a really basic way to say, to walk up to the scheduling computer, you must be in the engineering team. The engineering team includes 4 people. It's Bob, Mike, Jeff, and Jan. Okay, great. You've done that. When we have new people join the company, we create accounts. When people leave the company, we disable or delete those accounts so that they can't somehow access remotely, physically, they can't walk back in as a guest, whatever that might be. And then no shared accounts. Remember, no generic accounts. There can't be an account that says accounting, and then there are 2 people that are part of accounting. There can't be one that says administrative staff, and you have 3 admins because you have 3 different offices, and each admin's part of that administrative staff, and it's a single account. You can have a group, but you can't have a single account called admin staff. So, how do you create a policy to meet that? So, if you have no written policy, you're going to have to create one. You're going to have to write one down, and you should reverse engineer it. You should write it to reflect the requirements of CMMC. There are templates and guides and companies out there who will offer you pre-written policy creation. Some charge for it. Some offer some free versions of it. Some just want your info. They want you to sign up and give your email address, and they'll help you with this. You kind of don't really need this. These are very basic. Here's what a policy statement could look like. Users must log in using their own designated account and are not permitted to share workstations or usernames and passwords. All devices in scope must require unique logins and passwords. That's it. We just covered the AC requirement. We just covered not all 4 parts of it, but we covered most of the AC requirement. So this is what it really looks like when you sit down and say, I think we're doing it or we're kind of doing it. Here's what we need to accomplish. How do we make sure we're accomplishing it? So it's like a 3-step process. Here's what the policy says. Here's what we do today. Here's the delta. How do we fix that policy and make sure people are really doing it? Little more comprehensive example. So now we're trying to cover physical, PE. So this is the physical protection component of CMMC level 1. So remember, each one of those controls has specific requirements in it. So even though it's listed as one control, it has 4 requirements inside of it for physical. Limit physical access to systems, equipment, and environments to authorized users. Escort users and monitor their access. Maintain an audit log of physical access. And control and manage physical access devices, keys, badges, codes, etc. So you have a front door that's locked. You use keys or badges to get in. People aren't allowed to just walk in the door because it is locked unless they have a badge. Guests are allowed, but they must sign in and they must be escorted as they walk around the office. There must be a list where we can go back and see 3 weeks ago on Tuesday, June 15th, the AC person came in. They worked for 3 hours in this room. Awesome. You're meeting all those requirements. But how do you write that out? Here's what I would write as a comprehensive example of meeting those 4 requirements with this policy. Only authorized users will be permitted to have physical access to organizational information systems, equipment, and operating environments. Visitors must be escorted and monitored, and a log will be kept to track all physical access. You can identify who does these jobs. You can identify physical places that these processes happen. You can list the type of key or badge that you use. You can list the way that you create password policies or how you send those password policies and share them with your staff and employees. You can be as detailed as possible as you create this, and that policy then is your guiding light on how to comply with CMMC. So policy formation. Put the policies first, create them, make sure that they're in place. You actually do have to go out then and see that they work. So you can't just write down on a piece of paper, all guests are tracked, they sign in on an audit sheet, they're monitored as they walk throughout our office, and they sign out as they leave. They're given a guest badge while they're on site. Does that really happen? Is that true? So you got to have the policy written down to follow it, but you actually have to make sure that it's in effect, right? You are not actually CMMC compliant if you have a bunch of stuff written down, but very little of it is actually followed on a day-by-day basis. Auditing in CMC, this is really important. You should be checking on this on a regular basis. So once we do finish this first round and we submit, if you're a new company in this process, or this is the first time you're going through CMMC, afterwards, you're going to need a regular audit process. Some folks say that you should set up a quarterly or an annual process or multiple times per year. That's going to be up to you. It's about how much change happens in your environment, how much people are willing to follow these rules, and how much you're changing what you do today. So if part of CMMC is like really changing up your whole way of business, you're probably going to need to audit a little bit more to make sure that CMMC is actually being followed. If you're not really making a lot of changes, you just have to record it and get it written down and make those policies really well documented. You probably don't have to audit quite as much. But again, if you feel like you've put these rules in place and now 4 months have gone by and suddenly you see everyone putting sticky notes with their usernames and passwords on the door, people started leaving their badge at home and just asking a friend to scan them in at the front door, probably time for an audit, probably time to reconsider. And then self-assessment. Just remember, part of the self-assessment is auditing your own policies. You do have to be in auditing every year. So if you are updating every year and just saying, check, nothing changed. We didn't buy any new buildings. We didn't change our physical site. We don't need to redo this thing. We passed last year. No, you really do need to audit. Every year you need to make sure that that self-assessment is still accurate. So how to self-assess? Templates and guides. Utilize the tools. I talked about it last time we met. I will talk about it again next time. And next time I'll show you a short demo of how to use these tools. CISA is one that I always recommend because it's free. It's created by the government. It has really helpful descriptions, details, and examples of policies. So as you go through and do your self-assessment and say, what does physical security mean? What are they talking about? Is that the front door or is that like having cameras? They'll have examples in there. They'll break it down in a big, long, detailed way instead of that single line you'll find in the self-assessment guide. So utilize templates, utilize guides. The CMMC self-assessment guide should absolutely be your first start, right? They create a guide for you. If you're level 1, the guide's not all that long, so it's an easy read. If you're level 2, it's a little bit longer of a read, but that should be your first stop. CISA downloadable tool is one of many, but I recommend it because it's got no sales pitch. There's no commercialization of it, so they're not offering to sell you anything. There's no like, oh, this is the free version. If you want to use something beyond the free version and get all these great features, pay up. They don't have that. It's just free. You can also print these out. Self-assessments can just be printed. You could use an Excel sheet with the questions in there so you can edit it later. There's a place called Project Spectrum. It is a government authorized, so they're not part of the federal government, they're contractors, but they were paid by the CMMC folks and by DoD to set up a whole environment that allows for self-assessment. It has tools, it has guides, it has downloads. They have literally whole policy guides. So you can go in there and they have a template that says, here is how to conduct physical security at my office. You download the template and now you fill in what's true about your office. We use cameras, or we have a locked door, or we use badges, or we use a key code. So there are great templates out there. There are great starting points. And I really don't recommend anyone start from scratch. Go out and find stuff that's free, that's available to you, that's government approved, and utilize that in your journey. What are the core documentation artifacts? Remember, CMMC level 1, you don't actually need an SSP. Should you have an SSP? Is it recommended by every auditor and every CMMC assessor that I've worked with? The answer is yes. You don't have to turn it in at the end, but if it helps you do your job, if it helps make this process easier, helps to track things, then you should do it, right? You should take advantage of that. Should you start from scratch? No, because there are free ones out there. There are guides, there are templates, there are downloadable versions. Policies and procedures. Again, you need to have these. Do you have to submit them? Level 1, you don't. It's kind of strange. They're telling you have to have a bunch of policies and procedures, step-by-step instructions for how people do their job within these rules, but you don't need to submit them. You need to submit an affirmation, a check that says, I swear my company is doing what we're saying we're doing. And we have a whole list of policies and procedures. We've audited it. We know it to be true. I sign off on that. So you do have to have them. You don't have to submit them. POAM. I point it out because it has long been used by folks who are doing this work, and I still think it's a helpful idea. But the actual POAM, a project of actions and milestones, which used to be a part of the CMMC process, is no longer going to be really a part of the process moving forward. But there are POAM templates, there are POAM guides out there that I still think are helpful. Basically, it just says this. What is the thing that we're missing? Which one of these required policies do we not have in place? Okay, so identify it, list the resources that you need to get it done, talk about who on your team will get it done, and then give yourself a timeline to fix it. That's for you only. That's not being submitted to the government. It's not part of your final, report, but you can utilize that. So just keep it in mind as something that may be helpful for you. And then network and data flow diagrams. Again, not required at level 1, but is it helpful? Is it really important to know where the data is flowing? Does it make sense to have a physical map that shows you where this data is flowing so that you can use it when you work with third parties, that you can use it to explain to new employees or IT folks, that you can use in the event of an audit? Absolutely. So go out and find free software if you can use it. If not, you can do this for free in PowerPoint, in Word. You can draw it on a piece of paper. It's going to be a helpful tool as you understand your network. And then resources. I mentioned a bunch of time. These are the best resources that I'm aware of that are 100% free for small businesses. There are lots of other companies out there that are offering resources, but I chose not to include them simply because they all require some level of pay or of give us your data, set up a free call with us, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't use them. I'm just making sure that I give you free government, no strings attached. All of these resources are exactly that. We will share this PowerPoint after today's session, so you'll have access to all of these. Okay? That's it. We did a good job. We're at 12:52. We have some time for questions today. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and type a question into the Q&A, and we'll cover those now.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording.